أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome back. This session was supposed to be a panel debate between the presenters, but as we see that there are a lot of participants wanted to intervene and to ask and to comment, so we will leave this session also in order for you to have enough space to express yourself. So we will make it a plenary session, and we will open the floor immediately for one round of questions, let's say 5.
I think I only have one.
Be nice with my talk.
I'm not going to comment on it. I think I have just one question. I was giving an example that because you were asking me that to give you an example about the role of Maqasid, how it works. I would like to remind you that there are two types of Maqasid, as I mentioned yesterday. The first one is Maqasid al-Mukallaf, and the second one is Maqasid al-Shari', the objectives of the human being and the objectives of lawgiver, the lawgiver or God. So here I am talking about the objectives of the lawgiver. So here, how can we know the intended meaning by God? This is the big question that I mentioned yesterday. Some will go with the text, that the text is the only way that we can know the intended meaning by God, to talk to us directly. So now Dr. Tariq mentioned he mentioned fitra and universal. So Usul al-Fiqh, the Islamic legal theory, has the center or centralized the text as the only direct way to know the intended meaning by God. So how we will apply this? So there are the method of Usul al-Fiqh, the methodology of Usul al-Fiqh. But how can we combine between the reason and the text, the revelation, passing or avoiding this dichotomy, Greek dichotomy between reason and revelation? I will use Taha Abdul Rahman again here in this context. He has 2 or 3 definitions of rationality. One of them that I would like to use here, that al-aqlaniyya al-musaddada, the guided rationality. Huh? Guided. Yeah. Okay. So the guided rationality that was guided by the revelation. It's rational, but it was guided by the revelation. And this is why I gave you the example of alcohol. If we will say that it's haram, it's obligations, prohibited, it's prohibited because of destroying the rationality or the mind, and it's haram because to preserve your mind. So I can say, one can come to say that no, I drink and I can keep my rationality, and I can drink and do all my daily actions without any problem. So what will you say here? So will you use Maqasid to say that, okay, in this case the objectives is achieved, so it's not haram for you? Of course not. So at some specific point, you will come to the divine command theory. So if you are a believer. And this is why the Muslims just only use Maqasid when there is no text. If there is text, so they use the text, but they link between the purpose and the text itself. But the text is central. But if there is no text, how can we know the intended meaning by God? There is no text. Here they use Maqasid based on as a philosophy of the philosophy of legislation and the philosophy of fiqh. I'm not going to use jurisprudence or law or whatever. The philosophy of fiqh. So in this case, they induct they observe all the rulings that were mentioned in the texts, in all the texts, and then they will derive general rulings that, okay, these are intended by God. So, and then they will apply these general rulings on specific cases that were not mentioned in the text. So this can we call it al-aqlaniyya al-musaddada, you know, al-mu'ayyada. So al-musaddada. So it was guided by God, by the revelation. Now, dealing with the text, we have three elements: the reader, the text itself, and the author, the one who sent the text, or the author. Yeah. Yes. So the production, the end production is the result of the interrelation between these three elements, but still it's not enough. It should be what happened during the history is the interrelation between these three elements: the reader, the author, and the text, in the context. The context, I mean here that the community, and this is why I called it the living tradition. It's not individual opinion. What we know that now from the fiqh approach is the result of the interaction between the Muslim community during the history and the scholarship with the text. So text is not just individual relationship as the Salafis trying to do nowadays. So they go directly to the text and they will understand the text regardless what happened during the history. So and the classical, what we call them now, classical, they avoid the current time and they committed themselves to the tradition in the classical time only. But there is no continuity of dealing the text in the context and based on the knowledge and developing knowledge, you know, as it was used happening during the history. So the interpretation of the text is the result of interrelation between the community and the text. That's it.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I think there was only one question addressed to me about the transgression of the divine will. You know, Shatibi talked about this, like we said, and actually, you know, I explained that he was saying that when considering the rulings, when considering the text, one may think that some elements that where you cannot find an imperative injunction, you may think that this is not from religion, while it is by induction. وهو كذلك وهو من الدين بالاستقراء. It is by induction. And he gave some examples. And he said this is why, you know, the scholar should be aware that some things that, you know, in religion were not imperatively obliged or forbidden. It doesn't mean that they are not from the higher objectives. And he gave example about, you know, to feed yourself, etc. But what I got from reading him is that he was thinking that you should keep this in mind as a scholar, but there is no need for developing a theory or an epistemology based on, you know, natural law or based on the reality of fitrah, etc. You should not, you know, in striving to, because this is the purpose of Islam, to create a fitri individual, the individual who is in harmony with his fitrah, and to create a fitri society, because this fitri society will, you know, will create a fitri individual and vice versa. So what he said, he did not consider that to do this, you know, you need to develop any theorized, epistemological framework. And even he went beyond this, and this is why I wrote a second article replying to some of his statements. But the fact is that he was thinking that the text and the nature, the natural stimuli, is enough, because if there is a stimuli, like I said, that is not contained in its place without without any how do you say it, without any other natural stimuli conflicting it, there is a text, and this is enough. So either you are guided through the ethical, through the good, through a mission, throughout the natural stimuli, or either if your natural stimuli, it's conflicted, so it needs to be supported, well, there is the text. And he did not consider that there is something beyond this, but he did, say that you should keep it in mind. And of course today, like the sister was referring, today the reality changed radically. And today, contradicting the natural stimuli, there is a rule in usul fiqh that says الوازع الطبعي. This is Ibn al-Subki that says this in الأشباه والنظائر, but this sentence, but you can find this all over the usul fiqh. الوازع الطبعي مغن أو وازع الطبع مغن عن وازع الشرع, which means that the natural stimuli compensates the religious stimuli. And this is, like I said, the rule that you can find. This is Subki that said this literally in Ashbah wa Nadhair, but you can find it all over the usul. And Aziz ibn Abd Salam says something similar also in Qawaid al-Ahkam. But which means that why did religion not stipulate some elements? Because the religion just left this for your natural stimuli. It's not needed to be in the Quran or explicitly or in an imperative way. And in writing the research that I tried to present today, I say tried, I proposed, to complete this qaida, this rule. Because in our modern area, this rule is not enough to say وازع الطبع مغن عن وازع الشرع, but it should be completed by saying إذا اختل وازع الشرع وجب تعضيده أو وازع الطبع وجب تعضيده بوازع الشرع. If the natural stimuli is disturbed, it should be compensated, or it should be supported by the religious stimuli, because it's our responsibility. The revelation did not come with the means to achieve the things that are already achieved by natural stimuli. But if we, with our free will, we goes against the natural stimuli, then it's our ethical and religious responsibility to find the means to reestablish those natural stimuli and to recreate the fitri society and the fitri individual. Because today, actually, like you mentioned, the reality is going often against the fitra. And the example that was mentioned, and that Shatibi said you should keep this in mind, the example of green urban planning. Well, we can say here, okay, the scholars of the text, in the best cases, because they don't even read, a lot of them don't even read the outcomes of the studies that talking about the consequences of being in an urbanized areas and living with artificial light, etc., and all of the consequences on your psychology and on your education, etc. They don't even consider this, most of them. But let's say they consider this, and let's say they say, okay, we have Maqasid, so this is going against Maqsad Hifd al-Aql or Maqsad Hifd al-Nafs or etc. So this is religious. This is okay. Islamically, you should follow this green urban planning, etc. But the problem is that why are we not engaged? And why is it that we are not trying to assess what is the divine will, what is the natural stimuli, what is the fitra that we should cope to? Why are we not doing this? Because the West is doing it, but the problem is that the criteria of the West is not always ours. Okay, in this case, in this example, green urban planning, etc., we agree, but maybe the criteria of defining what is fitri and what is right, what should be compensated, when your nafs is creating a tension that is telling you here, it's tastanjid bil kharij. It's, asking help by external factor. What is the criteria of defining what is fitri and what is against fitri? So this will not always help these studies that are coming from the West, because here in that case it does, but often some things that are considered to be against the fitra, will not be considered by Western, studies. So here the problem is that we are absent. We are absent, and on the theoretical level, that is to develop an epistemology and a methodology that takes this into account. We are absent, and on the practical level, that doing studies in order to cope with the fitra, etc., and see what is going against the fitra, we are absent also. So this is the issue. Allahu a'lam. It's the conflict or the fact that it's challenged can come from outside, but the stimuli itself it's come from inside. And I give the example. For example, I said that your human being is he has all the elements that can guide him to his goal by his fitra, and the revelation just came to support this and to complete this. So normally by your fitra, if you were not in a physical body, in a physical world where you are responsible, you're khalifa, and khalifa means to manage. God is the manager, Allah is al-mudabbir, and He delegates a part of His responsibility, which is managing the universe, to you as a human being, and He said you have to manage some things in the example or following my example. And those parts of the management that were delegated to you as Khalifa is your inner world, the relationship with yourself, the spiritual world, to purify yourself in order to be in harmony with your true fitra, your true nature, and the relations with the others, and your relation with the natural resources that God gave you. So here, actually, what were we talking about?
Conflict between natural stimuli. Conflict between different natural stimuli.
Oh yeah. So here, yeah. So the fact is that here, the problem occurs when you're not managing well, and when this external factor make that you're naturally stimulated to worship God and to be submitted to God and to be just and to aspire. You aspire naturally to justice. You aspire naturally to the worship of God. You aspire naturally to the beautiful, to the honesty, etc., etc. But here we have some of these natural aspirations are, like I said, they are not conflicted by any other stimuli. You are naturally inclined, to preserve your life. And this is often not, you will not kill yourself. So there is not strong natural obstruction to this natural stimuli. But other things, like for example, natural aspirations for justice, often will be conflicted by other aspirations. For example, your aspirations to wealth. And the reality here will play a role. It will make you, run behind wealth. And this can conflict other natural stimuli, like your aspiration for justice, or maybe like your aspiration to worship God. So it's conflict. It's still there. The aspiration is still there, but it's conflicted because you did not manage well, and the reality made that your natural aspirations for money will become tagha. How do you say it? Tagha?
Went beyond control.
Yeah, went beyond control, and so you did not manage well. And I wanted to mention one hadith I did not mention before. It's in the Sahih Bukhari and Muslim, and it's not known very well, where the Prophet ﷺ says that Allah put the amana already in the heart of the human being. And then came the prophets. So this is very clear. The amana is already there. And then came the prophets. Allahu Akbar.
Okay, there were a few questions. The first one is about justice. I know all the discussions that we have in philosophical circles about the notion of justice. I think that we have to come back to what we have from an Islamic perspective. And there are levels when it comes to justice. First, justice is one of the names of Allah, of God, Al-Adl, which is also important because this also it's something which is the principle of justice is a principle. Now, how is it going to be implemented and translated into reality, something at tanzil or tadbir or the understanding? But there are levels. The first is to understand that anything that has to do with our life, in Allah ya'muru bil adl, God commands justice, so we have to keep it as a principle. The first, there is something in Islam which is an ontological justice, قَالَ رَبَّنَا ظَلَمْنَا أَنفُسَنَا, which is what is the first dimension of dhulm or of injustice. The first is not to acknowledge the very essence of God. إِنَّ الشِّرْكَ لَظُلْمٌ عَظِيمٌ. So this is also the ontological dimension of justice, is something that we have to keep in mind. Why? Because that's exactly the point. It's in sociological and political sciences what you have. In sociological studies very often, and even in philosophy, the concept of justice with roles, for example, is once again deconstructing the whole thing, that it became or it becomes quite relative to the context, and I think that is very dangerous. So if you take justice only in rational terms, it could be very problematic, and by saying, oh, you know, it's complex and everything is relative. No, the ontological justice for us coming from Islam, based on the human nature, based on fitra, based on the very essence of God, as al-adl, ya'muru bil-adl, and this belief in the oneness of God for us, it's the dimension of justice, and then it's connected also to the principle of wisdom. It's just everything should be at the right place, which has to do with the concept of justice. This is the starting point of the discussion. Now, how in interpersonal relationship this is going to be implemented, this is where the human agency is very important. But not at the price of the ontological, not at the price of the very first meaning, and not at the price of the maqsad as a justice. Now, the fact that it has to do with the context, that's exactly where the fiqhi approach is essential. What was said about, there is a text, there is a context, the text is going to be understood, and how are you extracting the principle in the interaction between the text and the context? This is why you are going to get the principle, but you need to keep it as a higher objective. Now, in which way it's going to be implemented, it's specific to the field and specific to the knowledge itself. This is why I'm not very happy with what I got coming from al-usuliyin and coming from all the people who are talking about Maqasid and keeping on. We had a discussion once with, had a discussion with Sheikh, what is his name? Who was with us in Ismail? لا 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 قولوا Ben Baya, Sheikh Ben Baya. When he was saying, no, there are 5 principles and we have to stick to this. And then, by the way, Sheikh al-Raisuni, in fact, quite differently from what he wrote in his book on al-Shatibi, was saying, no, we have to keep in the 5 principles are important. I think if we keep this as the gap there is between the 5 main principles coming from, once again, the intuition coming to the objectives through the legal, it's bringing this so wide objectives that at the end, it's not going to have an impact on the way we deal with things, only on the legal side, not on the ethical side. So this is why, for example, when it comes to medicine, when it comes to political sciences, when it comes to environment, the notion of justice is going to be adapted to the field itself. So this is why you need the people in this field to tell us, where are you going to talk about this? So you can't just have, the concept of justice, that's fine, and so you come to the ontological. If it's not applied ethics is what it means to be able to get this balance and this in a specific field, in every field. So this is why we need to have maqasid in every field of the human activity. It has to be translated. So the fact that what we have now in philosophical discussion about, we don't agree on the notion of justice, I don't agree with this. From an Islamic perspective, the starting point of justice, there is something that we agree upon. So that's another discussion. But it's equality, because you are saying that justice is about equality before law. So in the simplest philosophical or legal discussion, many lawyers could say, no, it's not exactly this. What do you mean by equality before law? You also have to look at the status of the people within the society. Because, for example, if just look at anything which has to do with the cultural context, for example, when it comes to school, for example, you can say equality before law means that you will have the right to go to schools. Now, which type of school, what is going to be given to you from where you are starting, this is something that has to do with, to be integrated in any notion of justice, because we might have exactly the same right, we don't start with the same, from the same beginning or the same start. So it's much more complex than that. But I would say that, yes, we have to go deeper in this discussion, and we cannot simplify this in anything which has to do, for example, when it comes to gender, it's where does justice stand when you are talking about equal before law? While the traditional discourse of Muslim scholars is, oh, you know what, we are equal before God and complementary in society, which in itself is a problem.
You have what we call the vulnerable groups, du'afa. They cannot be treated equally like the others before the law. Otherwise, there will be no justice. So people who are incapacitated, cognitively speaking, people who cannot express themselves, you cannot hold them accountable for specific actions. You cannot expose them to the same procedures in the court, etc. You cannot follow the same items in the law, apply them to them, etc. So, and because of justice, we cannot treat them equally like the others. So these are, but you can see these more as the exceptions to the rule. But to apply it generally and as a sweeping rule, it will result in injustice at the end. Now, we say not only about family, I say generally speaking, the general rule is that people should be equal before the law, equal in their chance to appear before the law, so nobody will be exempted from this, exposed to the same procedures and the same items, so we will not have some laws for this group and some for the others. All this is equality before the law. People should be treated equally, but as we say, equal people should be treated equally. So if we have vulnerable groups, for instance, it will be injustice to deal with them like the others. We have in Islamic law some cases, specifically with intellectual disabilities. They don't have legal capacity. Either they miss the full legal capacity completely, or they have partial legal capacity. These people cannot be treated like the others, and I think this happens in all just judiciary systems, not just in Islamic in the Islamic tradition. But anyhow, in the Islamic tradition, it is recognized that the less capacities you have, the more protection you get, and vice versa. So for instance,
Please, question. We can leave the questions
Yes.
for the second round.
Was there another question
For
again?
the second round. But,
So for instance, children will get more, and they will be asked to do less after the age of what we call the age of tamyiz.
discernation.
No.
Discernation.
Discernment, the age of discernment, that you can recognize the right and the wrong, but you are not it's still adult. Then the level of what you asked to do is more, and then the level of adulthood, then more, and then rushd, then it will be complete, and so on. So this moves on the basis of the capacities that the person has. And to my understanding, this is linked. It is, of course, discussed in detail in Islamic legal theory, in usul, and applied in Islamic law, in fiqh. But it is linked to theological principles about divine justice, and asking people the unbearable, التكليف بما لا يطاق. It's impossible that God gives us certain capacities and asks us at the end to do things which are beyond our capacities. In order to downstream this to usul and fiqh, then you have to deal with the issue of treating people equally before the law.
No, but by the way, on this, all the philosophy that you have in many societies when it comes to affirmative action is based on this approach, that in the name of justice, or treating the people in a just way, you are not treating them in an equal way, which is affirmative action is based on this also, in a way. So about, there are two things that was said. The first was about, I said that everything which is ethical should be legal. This is not what I said. I said that I don't want all the ethical to be legal. I want the ethical sometimes and not always. That's very important. Not all the ethical should be legal. That would be against the spirit of Islam. But we need to consider in some situation to produce the legal, taking into account the ethical in the way we are dealing with issues. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that we should reconcile the ethical and the legal, but I don't want all the ethical to be legal. I think that would be completely counterproductive and wrong.
Legal in the modern state.
In the modern state, and even in Islam, even in the way we deal with the fiqh.
Because this dichotomy between law and ethics is problematic.
Is
problematic and it's modern problem.
No, it's not. I think it's problematic, but it's not modern. I think it's very old, even in the Islamic tradition. No, I really think it is. The second point about spiritual.
I don't want to react from you.
But you did, so I have to respond. About the spiritual, I didn't say it's the most important. It is critical, it's essential. I said it's the first, it's the starting point of everything, which for me makes it essential and not the most important, because at the end I really think that active spirituality in everything that we do, I'm not, I really think that what we are getting out of the Islamic tradition is that the spiritual dimension, it's not something that is disconnected from the practical life. The way you work, the way you teach, the way you serve the people, this is spiritual. So it's the starting point of everything, but it should be everywhere. So when I'm saying this has to be connected to two things, the ethical and the legal, it's because the legal is necessary. We are human beings and we need laws and we need rules. No way for us just to be ethical. If this would be the case, it would be known by us that we only need just values. We don't. We need regulations. In fact, all the rituals that are immutable are just telling us these are the rules, these are the foundations, these are the pillars. They are here because you are human beings. So they are all means for you to remember. And then you have the way that you have to follow, and to get, the image of the way that you are following is just making it clear that you need to have limits to know what is the way. That's by definition. No way if there are no limits for you to know, and the rules are important. So that's very important. Why? To reconnect the three of them. Because if we don't do this from the very beginning, and we don't put the spiritual, and I think the essence of a taqwa, the essence of getting or trying to get this salamat al-nafs, this peace, the intimate peace and the social peace and all this, based on the good, the salah or whatever, righteousness. If we don't get this, at the end, the problem that we can have here, it's in our discussion, it's to do exactly what the West is doing. You know what? We have a committee of ethicists. Give us what is good and bad. It's not going to have an impact on our life, but do it. Tell us, which is what we are sometimes doing with many of our settings. It's just we have ethical production, unproductive.
And it comes post the action.
Exactly, it comes afterwards. So the legal try to catch up, and the ethical comes after, and it has no real impact. So that was my take. And the last thing about, no, I think that there were two other questions about why did I speak about where, yeah. No, that's what not, I took this as an example. When you are, because I just took the very notion of human being, and it's based for us. وَمِن كُلِّ شَيْءٍ خَلَقْنَا زَوْجَيْنِ, that there is something which is essential for us as the being, men and women. If you start touching this by saying, in fact, this is a product, it's a social product, it's not there, and we are constructing this, you see where you can go, to the point that you are opening the door to progress of technology, challenging this, which is, once again, a very important.
Even biological differences.
Yes, exactly. So to go as to that point, and then now you can take this for women, you can take this for men, you can just talk about the very notion of human beings. So I took this as an example how this could be translated. And the last. Exactly. So that also has to do with the Tawheed as the oneness of God and something which is important. What I was saying about personal development, you know, the point is to distinguish between the means and the goals. So what we are looking at now is in the West, but not only, I saw this, I was in Morocco and I was surprised by the fashion of personal development over there. It's just people just following, feeling good and everything. And it's disconnected from two things. Sometimes it could be, and this is why I want you to be cautious about this, it's disconnected from this relationship to God, and it's a means producing well-being as a technique. The technique should remain a technique. And it could be this, if and only if the starting point is to try to find a way to be reconnected to God, to Allah, which is the main relationship, is to be with Him, and to use the means maybe to serve the way you are with your environment to remain connected. If it's all coming as means to the ultimate goal, being with Allah and meditating and serving Him through the way I use the means, that's fine. But the problem is exactly this. It's that sometimes in the means, there is the goal. And you have to be very, you know, once I was saying something to an economist and he told me something that shaken my mind. When I was saying, you know what, you have to take from the West all the means and you put the right goals. He smiled and said, okay, what if the goal is in the means? That if you really think that you can take the TV set and you can make it an educational means for the people to get more knowledgeable, and you don't understand that in the TV device, there is the goal of entertainment, you don't get it. So sometimes the means are bringing with them some goals.
But who said that the means are neutral?
And yes, but that's exactly the point. Could we have neutral means? And I think still that in the name of our understanding, in our concept, what is said that you can use the means and transform them with your goal, which is also part of the spiritual process. So we might have means that are not neutral. It doesn't mean that they are not changeable and they cannot be integrated into something which is deeper. The question is how, and to make clear that the essential goals are known and set in a clear way. If not, this could be shirk. That's all fine. That's all fine, but where do you set the limits, and how, you know, to feel good or to get the right meanings to speak in public, for example. That's very good. That's very useful. You can take it as personal development. It's the very essence of what this feeling good means. With whom and how? That's the question. That's the essential question. So at the end, I need to have the technique to be able to speak and to be confident before the people. If and only if, in my side, I understand the meaning of starting by Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim in my heart with him. I know, that you're not going to tell them, you're not there to convert them, say you have to say Bismillah, if not this shirk. I'm talking about us from within the Islamic tradition. I understand that you have to sell or to teach this as techniques and to understand clearly that the well-being coming out of it is not what we are talking about in a spiritual way. But that's exactly the point. That's exactly, here we are at the center of this discussion. If the fitra is only about feeling good without him, that's the problem. That's the problem. If at the end, in the consumerist society, you sell a technique telling you, you know what? It's for you to feel good, to feel confident. And you cut it from God, from where you are, that's a deep problem. Because you end up thinking that feeling good is enough. That even not that, you don't need God, but it's even the meaning of feeling good, feeling at peace with your own self. So once again, I'm saying that when you are talking in a society and you say, okay, at the end, what is important is to feel good, we have to push. We have to push and say, what is the meaning of feeling good? So I'm, for this, to tell you the truth, what I'm seeing in the West, but also in Muslim majority societies, all this business of personal development, I think that there are things that are very important and things that are utterly, thoroughly dangerous.
I just wanted to comment briefly on this also, just to complete what has been said.
10 minutes left.
I think that the Quran is teaching us that the human being was not created for this earthly life. The reality of human being is that it's a being that has been created for another reality, because essentially the human being is aspiring, like I said before, for the absolute happiness, absolute beauty, absolute knowledge, absolute good, absolute justice, etc., which cannot be addressed, or which cannot be pleased by what is existing here in this earthly reality. And this is why the Quran is telling us that وَمَا مَتَاعُ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَمَا الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا مَتَاعُ الْغُرُورِ. This earthly life, it's a tricky, or al-ghurur, it's the fact to letting you know to trick you or to fool you. So it's a tricky pleasure, which means that it makes you think that it will satisfy your aspirations, but it's lying to you. And you think, okay, and you're following it because you have your soul is calling, and it has aspirations, and you're trying to satisfy them, and you are satisfying them with something that is lying to you and telling you that it will. And this is why mata'ul ghurur, the false, or the lying or the tricky, pleasure. And Allah says also in the Quran, وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّ اللَّهَ يَحُولُ بَيْنَ الْمَرْءِ وَقَلْبِهِ. Know that Allah is between the man and his heart, which means that this, aspirations, its absolute aspirations, can only be fulfilled, in a world that was created, truly created for who the human being truly is. And in this world, it can only be satisfied and calmed when your heart is related to the absolute. And there is where you can find real happiness and real good feeling. And this is where I'm afraid that some parts of this, practices are from mata' al-ghurur, which makes you think, okay, now I will provide you well-being and good feeling, etc. While Quran teaching is that this is impossible without God, because He is the source. He's the absolute through which our being is aspiring. Allahu A'lam.
I think the issue is still deeper than this, because even about spirituality now, we have through neurological stimulations, you can have also the spiritual experience, you can have the connection with the absolute, everything can be artificially stimulated. my own personal opinion about this, and I want to share it with you also to see if it will work. Moral improvement is part of what we know in the Islamic tradition as mujahadatun nafs. We are created with this dual system, the good and the bad, built in, and it is our duty to struggle in order to maximize the good and minimize the bad. And this is mujahada. This is mujahada. It's a struggle. It is a fight. It is difficult. It's not easy. So that there can be improvement at the end. Now, as whether it is part of the spirit of our modern time or modernity or medicalization, whatever, there is an inclination to go beyond this, to skip this process of mujahada. So, if some people, we had a discussion in the Netherlands about the possibility of courting. What's this?
Courting. Shortening?
لا courting على البضائع انك تعمل courting. Reductions, yes, reductions for alcohol and beer. If the supermarkets can give big seasons. To say you can pay for one and take 10 or whatever. And if this is okay for the supermarkets to do such a thing. And most of the people they say, yes, of course, you can, because it's a market. It's economy, it's a market, it's a supply and demand, etc. And okay, and the people who may become alcoholists because of this, they say, no, alcoholism is a disease. It is a disease. You just go to the doctor and doctor will treat you. That's it. So you leave everything going on in the society with no limits, and whenever you have problems, you put these people in the corner because they are patients, they have a disease, and then you treat them. And we can go on this way all the time. So even when we lack now spiritual experience, it's all also medically can be managed. We do neurological stimulation, and then you will get it. Where is the moral improvement? When will this happen? And now we have discussions about moral enhancement. If you have people who have morally speaking problematic behavior, you don't have to do education for them and tarbiyah, etc. We do moral enhancement. It's all about specific genes. We fix these genes and the person will be fine. We cannot go on this way. We cannot go on this way. This will make us lose part of the built-in capacities of improving and repairing ourselves. The things we do not use physically, cognitively, mentally, whatever, the things we do not use get corrupt. If you don't use your arm for a long time, your arm will not work anymore. If you don't use your mind for a long time, cells will die. So these built-in capacities cannot be left out like this because we try to make things easier and easier for the people. And we have the concept of taklif in Islam. You get rewards because you worked hard. So if I have moral problems and I got moral enhancement, so I became better, who did now the hard work? The one who developed the techniques for moral enhancement or myself? So there will be big problems. I personally have big problems with this, even whether it looks fine or even it will lead to spiritual improvement. Maybe I'm too traditionalist, but
even
I have a problem.
The modern philosophy, moral philosophy, there is a big discussion about this issue, ethically, because it's connected to the responsibility. And responsibility is the core issue in the moral philosophy. Of course, in the Quran too. Yeah.
So we will leave it by the first round, and we will have enough time, inshallah, this afternoon to continue the discussions.